I couldn't agree more. It's terribly important that we spread the message and get people to understand the threat. I'm really pleased to have heard Steve and Michael talking about the difficulties, the problems, and I feel that we don't by any means have the answers, yet we have to keep on applying money into research. Money should not be frittered away by this government, giving tax breaks to oil and gas companies for fracking. I mean, I can't remember quite how long ago it was, but a day after Osborne had stood up and said, yes, we're going to give you tax breaks, Peter Lilly, a Tory MP of many years standing, the director of an oil company in Kazakhstan, wrote a piece, I think it was in the Telegraph, might have been the Times, saying, I don't quite understand why Mr. Osborne has given tax breaks. The whole idea is that this should be a profitable enterprise anyway. I'd just like to share with you, if I may, one or two quotes from David Howell, Lord Howell's speech he made recently, having been to a couple of conferences, one in Qatar and one in Windsor, UK, when he was talking about how fracking is beginning to implode as a financial prospect. He's talking about how it took a long time to take off in the US. This because long, and I'm quoting here, long and protracted legislative wrangles slowed everything down. Final release and fracking takeoff only came with the passing of the Act in 2005, which exempted licensees from the US Clean Water Act. Highly controversial and bitterly contested to the last. Another point he makes, where these incentives do not operate, and that's the incentive of landowners getting revenue from the oil and gas companies, the Americans argue that it's a waste of time and money trying to engage with and bribe rural communities that do not want it. They urge only going, to start with, to areas where local people want fracking, well away from all communities, and ideally in derelict or wasteland areas with no nature or environmental significance. Perhaps that's in reference to that whole desolate north area. Then he says one of his conclusions is that spending time and money trying to bribe and cajole rural communities is a complete waste, as well as putting backs up and losing rural votes on a major scale. Villages and their environs where homes are worth $1 million will be unimpressed by £100,000 offers and by assurances that only 2 years of heavy truck traffic will disturb them. Every time ministers open their mouths to claim that fracking must start everywhere around Britain, and not just in carefully selected and remote (brackets, derelict) areas, they lose thousands of Tory votes. In the northeast, the northwest, and all the places where the Industrial Revolution has left the worst historical scars, they do have just such areas. They have the gas, they have the local wish to see fracking investment, to upgrade old coal mining areas, for example. Now, I think that is it's tosh. It's complete rubbish, that last statement. I don't think anyone who's been screwed once wants it to happen again. But anyway, the extraordinary thing is, having made the point in this piece, that the investors are pulling out, the companies who've invested in Poland are putting out, 4 large companies pulled out of Poland. It isn't making the big companies the money. Suddenly, he comes up with this paragraph at the end of this piece saying, I dearly want to see economically viable shale gas and oil production go ahead as soon as possible in Britain. But we're going about the task the wrong way. A change of direction is urgently required. Now, I don't know if that was just put in by the editor of something called the Journal of Energy Security right at the end. It actually wasn't written by Howell, but it just seems the most astonishing conclusion to a piece that was actually making the point that they're not making money out of it anyway. It's a Ponzi scheme.
Thanks very much. Brenda, I think you want to add to that?
Yes, thanks for your input from the audience there. It actually reminded me of a couple of other things that I wanted to say. Yes, please, I was saying about getting involved, and yes, if there's something near you, or even if you can travel to go and support some of the protest camps, because that's the thing that's raising the profile in the media. Before last summer, we did we've done some public meetings and trying to get engagement on fracking, and people weren't coming to them, they hadn't heard of it, but because it got in the national press, the power of that is amazing in terms of raising awareness, both with normal, ordinary people, but also with councillors and MPs and decision makers, which is the people we need to be targeting. I just wanted to drop in a couple of things. One is a massive success globally this week, which Paddy knows about, but in Australia there have been thousands of people at what's called the Bentley blockade. This is doctors, teachers, families have been camping out in a field because of a company so appallingly bad at doing the oil and gas extraction there. I mentioned coal seam gas earlier. It's a filthy process. And they have been doing that, and these people have just been, they've got a movement called Lock the Gate, which is where they're getting communities putting up signs and saying we are not going to give a social licence to these oil and gas companies. So it comes back to this point about people need to rise up, and it's not going to be the politicians that give the answers. And this week, this company called Metcalfe had its licence withdrawn by the local county governor. And that's the first time I've heard of that happening anywhere globally. I'm not sure if that's true, but that's my opinion. And also, not only was the licence revoked, the company was also reported to whatever the board is, I can't remember the name, on standards in that area because of a stitch-up. Sorry? Independent Committee Against Corruption. I was just trying to look it up because I couldn't remember the title, thank you, for a stitch-up between the people that were making money on the company and the people that were deciding on it. So it's a massive victory, but the reason the licence was revoked was because they obviously had to find a reason, the governments, but it's very interesting because it was lack of good community engagement, and we have seen time and time again in the UK that not just Quadrilla, there are a number of other companies that say, they tell the councils locally they're engaging with the communities, but they don't hold an open public meeting. They'll do it in any such way so that they can engage with people in a piecemeal one-to-one way rather than in an open hall where people can answer and hear the answers to their questions, and that is a really big problem. Another really good piece of news from the US is a few weeks ago a family who had been suffering rashes, nosebleeds, a humongous load of health problems. At last, a case has gone to court and they were awarded £3 million a few weeks ago. And what I wanted to raise is the sneakiness of the oil and gas companies, I was saying, and you were saying about them possibly infiltrating the protesters. The fight we have got is ever more difficult because they keep sidestepping all the rules and being really not very good at all. Thanks.
Very interesting. Right. Thanks very much for those updates.
This is a question about biomass. I'm concerned, and I wonder if anybody in the panel can give me the truth of this, about the idea of using imported wood to fire power stations. Surely that is not a green or sustainable solution for lots of reasons. Is this really policy? Is this really going to happen? I heard about Drax. You know?
Stephen?
That's the sort of thing that happens when you turn things over to markets. That is wood green? Yes, it is. Does bringing it from Indonesia make any sense? Not really. Does palm oil, tankers of palm oil coming from Indonesia, from plantations where they've got rid of virgin rainforests, really doesn't make any sense. But that's what happens when you turn things over to market mechanisms, and that's one of my frustrations, that economists always devise schemes that look great in principle, which turn out, when they're actually applied, to be exploited and not achieving what they're meant to achieve. So
this is happening. This is what's happening to coal-fired power stations.
I think the Drax proposal was turned down. I may be wrong on that, but I mean there are certainly tankers of palm oil going around the world to be burnt in power stations.
As a green solution.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes, Michael.
well, very briefly, it was just what you said, those last few words, a green solution. I mean, the fact is biofuels are regarded as renewables. I mean, I just don't understand the logic of that. The idea that, of course, you can grow more is totally different from the use of the wind, the sun, the waves, etc. And as we've heard, if you have enormous amount of land which is given over to the building of or to the sowing of biofuels or regular cropping, there is a very real question of what you are excluding, because the scale of it has to be enormous. I wasn't aware that it had been turned down at tracks. It was certainly being pushed very hard, and if it has been turned down, I suspect they will be returning to it. Not because it's renewables, but because it's profitable.
Thanks very much. Brenda, you just wanted to add a quick
Yeah, just
point?
very briefly, if you look up on Friends of the Earth's website, we have a briefing on biomass, which I contributed to actually and helped to write. And basically our position is that biomass burning is a good idea if it's on a small scale and sustainably produced wood locally, not transported huge distances. So that is our position, which we think is quite sensible. And there's some more to our policy in there. There's actually not just co-firing through coal-fired power stations, but there are applications coming in around the country, like in Southampton, for biomass generators bringing imported wood, not just from places like Indonesia, but they'll argue from Norway and places where it's surplus to requirements, supposedly, which still isn't a good idea in terms of transporting it. So we are seeing more of this, and that's partly, and as you said, because the profits to be made from it, and that's why companies are doing it.
Right, thanks very much for that.
Pump storage has been around for a long time. There are 2 stations in Wales, Festiniog, which is about 1967, Dinorwig about 1987. They are very big things. They are not terribly efficient. You lose about 30% of the electricity. You pump the water up the hill and you get 70% of it back. It's a very... We don't honestly have the right terrain for it here. I rock climb a little bit, and the Norwich site is on some rock climbing area, and when they turn the taps on, it'll probably knock you off the rocks. It's knocking the mountain to bits. It's not a great thing to do. R&D. I mean, and I want to come on to public ownership at the end, and I'm well disposed towards public ownership, except how it was actually carried out. And the publicly owned companies wasted huge amounts of money on their R&D. The CGB spent massive amounts on nuclear power. British Gas spent massive amounts on turning coal into gas. So I do see the need for public R&D, but just going back to the old system, that's the point I want to end up with.
Because at that time, that was the current thinking, that we were going to have gas, we were going to have nuclear power. Now, if we had the right sort of government in, a green Labour government, which wanted to direct resources and research into renewable energy, a state research institute along those lines would surely work.
Yeah, I mean, state R&D is a good thing, but how you get the agenda right is not easy. I mean, it's not right to say that nuclear seemed to be the right answer and substitute natural gas seemed to be the right answer. Most people knew it was a bad idea, but it was a fun thing for them to do. They were unaccountable, and they were not held to task for wasting public money in the way that they did.
With our fledgling energy cooperative, one of the things that we've said we're going to do, it's a certain type of organisation. We're not looking for profit. We're looking for a decent return. At the moment, it's set at 5%. If we get the tax breaks that come with EIS status, it might be a little more than that for our investors. Any money that we make over and above that return to the investors will be spent on community projects like energy efficiency, like education of the younger generation about the whole problems of how we get our energy, where we get our energy from, how we look after things. So we don't actually have any projects in Balcombe at the moment, but it is certainly one of the things that we're going to be spending any profits that do, cross fingers, eventually come from our energy cooperative.
Thanks for that. Brenda?
Yeah, I was just going to mention there's a number of what are called energy services companies operating around the southeast, and there's one in Lewes called Avesco. Have you heard of them? And they have actually received a grant from the Department of Energy and Climate Change in the last couple of months, and they have set up a mentoring group for community energy groups, and those would be not just about installing new power sources, but also about energy efficiency, because Avesco in particular already gives advice and delivers energy efficiency measures in the Lewes District Council area, for example. And there's a group like that in Basingstoke and some other, in Oxford there's groups doing that. And we need more and more, like with the campaigning, we need more and more people taking energy into their own hands. And it's not, you're quite right, energy efficiency is as important, if not more important, i.e. not wasting energy as getting renewable sources. Thanks.